Good morning and welcome to Coffee with Mr. V. As you can see, I'm wearing my headset today. That's because I've got my children in the other room and they're being very noisy. So hopefully by wearing this, you won't hear them as much. We'll see. Anyway, you know how it works. Go and grab yourself a coffee and or your favorite liquid, put it in a mug, a glass or a cup and come back to me and we will do the synchronized sip, and that is going to be the best part of your lockdown day. So here we go. 1, 2, 3. I love coffee, especially in a different beat mug. Right, today we're just going to tackle something called trade creation and trade diversion. In order to do this properly, you need to start with the tariff diagram. Okay, here. Remember, I'm just going to talk us through how we built the tariff diagram in the first place. We had domestic demand and domestic supply, and then we had a perfectly elastic supply world curve. Because if you remember what we said at the time is that the world is a big place compared to the size of this particular country. So then they can, in effect, produce an infinite amount of this particular product with respect to the demand of this particular country. Okay. That gave rise to a situation in which we had Q1, Q2 level of imports. All right, I'll just write that in. And then we had the tariff, the tariff. So this is now our tariff diagram. Okay, and that gave rise to a situation where we had cut the imports from Q1, Q2 to Q3, Q4. And if you remember some of the analysis that we did there, we said that consumer surplus had fallen from that big triangle to that small triangle there. So we lost that consumer surplus. So that orange trapezium there is loss of consumer surplus. However, some of that loss of consumer surplus is regained. Okay, so for example, I'll use a different color. For example, domestic producer surplus rises from that green triangle there to that green triangle there. So some of the loss of consumer surplus has been recaptured by producers. In addition, you'll remember, everybody remembers, that this rectangle here is government revenue. So assuming that government revenue goes into providing public goods and merit goods as it should, then part of the loss of consumer surplus is also recaptured by the government. By the society. But if you remember, what we said then is these little two triangles kind of get missed off a little bit. Okay, we called that welfare loss of the tariff. So when we talk about trade creation and trade diversion, normally we're now talking about trading blocks, whether it's a free trade area or a customs union. We're talking about removing the tariffs. So we're going from a position of SW plus T to a position of just SW. So we're instead of imposing the tariff, instead of putting it on, we're taking it off. Okay, and really all trade creation is then saying is we have gained, all right, there is a gain, a welfare gain of A plus B, okay, as a result of taking the tariff off. In addition, there is kind of a increase in total sales, total consumption from Q4 to Q2. Doesn't really matter that the ratio of imports to domestic sales at this point. Okay, what's important is these two aspects here. This, for me, particularly the first one, is essentially what we're talking about when we're talking about creation. Trade creation is the advantages that come from free trade, the advantages from taking down protectionist measures like tariffs that were on before. Okay, and the big advantage is that welfare gain. Okay, the big problem of tariffs was the welfare loss. So by taking them off, we should talk about the benefits, and that is the welfare gain, the two triangles A plus B. So that is our trade creation diagram. That is why economists like free trade because remember, economists are obsessed with this idea of social welfare, producing where marginal costs are lower than marginal benefits, all the rest of it. So we're really, really happy that society, from an efficiency point of view, from a social surplus point of view, is happier than it was. So trade creation, big tick. Okay. However, we should also consider this thing called trade diversion. Now, I probably won't do this with you until right at the end of the spec because for me, it doesn't really, we shouldn't really look at it until, it's not that we shouldn't, it's probably best understood once you started doing different style trading blocks, and in particular, the customs union, in particular the common market. So once you're talking about the four freedoms and things like that, and you're now talking about countries taking away tariffs, but only on other members and not the entire world. So it becomes a little bit more complicated now. So again, we'll start off with our tariff diagram. Okay, well, in fact, that's just a trade diagram. I'm just going to get rid of this because I'm kind of running out of room on my ball on the right-hand side. So I'm going to have to switch a lot of the analysis to the left-hand side here. And this is us putting a tariff on everybody. Okay. I'm going to leave this blank for a moment because I've got quite a thick pen. So I feel like if I can't start drawing with this thick pen, then you're probably going to lose sight of what some of it's saying. But you understand this analysis if you don't go back and watch the tariff diagram or just rewind what we did here. Okay, so this is us with a tariff on. But part of being in a common market, as we said, is to reduce tariffs on our kind of member friends, but to keep tariffs on, that common external tariff on non-members. But what might happen is that one of our member countries might not actually be the lowest cost producer. So let's take the example of the EU then for a moment. If we were part of the EU and we took off tariffs for, say, Greece on, and including that is textiles, okay, so clothing, we could take tariffs off and Greece may well be the lowest cost producer of clothing in the EU. Great. But relative to the world, places like Bangladesh, Vietnam might still be able to do clothing a hell of a lot cheaper to Greece, in which case we've still got the tariff on them. So this would still be kind of a tariff on Bangladesh and Vietnam. Okay, now if we take the tariff off to Greece, okay, here we have taken the tariff off, and now Greece is the lowest cost supplier that we could possibly buy our textiles from. Now, all of this analysis so far should still be the same. We had our consumer surplus here. Remember, this was our lost consumer surplus from the initial thing. And by taking the tariff off, we are going to gain these two areas. So far, by taking the tariff, we have gained areas A and B in just as it is over here. Okay, so exactly the same analysis as I've done before. Okay, taking the tariff off has meant that consumer surplus gain, the consumer surplus, remember, was here. Okay, and by taking the tariff off, it's now extended to here. Okay, so the loss in domestic producer revenue, the loss of government revenue has been more than made up for by the increase in consumer surplus. All right, so far this is a gain. But economics is always the study of alternatives and what could have happened if we had actually reduced the tariff for everybody and not just on our members. If we'd have reduced it for everybody, then this would be the supply curve for Bangladesh and Vietnam. It would have been cheaper than Greece as a producer of textiles. So actually, we are still losing out. We could have, if we'd have reduced tariffs on everybody, we could have gained that entire area here. As it happens, though, we didn't gain that area and we didn't gain that area. So there is still a welfare loss overall in society by having tariffs on members, on non-members, and getting rid of tariffs on members. So we still lose out. There is still a welfare loss, or still lose out, or a welfare loss of C and D by only reducing tariffs on non-members. And I've used Greece here as my example, but of course, in any given case study, it might be a different country, depending on what the common market is that you're studying. Okay, so there is still a welfare loss of C and D. So just to run through that again, we had a tariff on everybody. We then reduced that tariff on member countries, and I'm assuming that we're in the EU in this particular scenario. And what I'm saying is, hypothetically, it will be good stuff. But economics is saying, but actually, if we'd have reduced the tariffs on everybody and not just on our member countries, actually welfare loss. And that's why the WTO has a little bit of a love-hate relationship with trading blocks, because on the one hand, the WTO is very happy that we are reducing protectionist policies against member countries. Happy with that. It kind of fits with David Ricardo's theory. But on the other hand, we've still got tariffs on non-members, and that's what they are constantly lobbying against with regards to trading blocks. The WTO would like it if there wasn't such a thing as a current external tariff. WTO would prefer if there were no protectionist policies anywhere in the world and between anybody. So that concludes our trade creation, trade diversion video. Look forward to hearing again from you next time. Ask me any questions, okay? Bye.